The night I found out, I was carrying a bowl of stew I'd made from scratch. Lamb. His favourite. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon in that kitchen, stirring, seasoning, tasting, the way a good mate does, the way I always did. I remember thinking, walking down that corridor toward his study, that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe he'd look at me the way he used to, before the title, before the council, before Elder Cassian started whispering in his ear that the Alpha King needed a stronger presence at his side. I could hear voices before I reached the door. I stopped, not because I was afraid. I stopped because I recognized the second voice, low, feminine, confident in a way I had quietly trained myself not to be around Draven. Around him, I had learned to shrink, to agree, to fold myself into whatever shape made the room easier to breathe in. I set the bowl down on the side table. I pressed my palm flat against the cold stone wall, and I listened. What I heard didn't break me the way people imagine these things break you, with screaming, or tears, or a collapse to the floor. It broke me the way old wood breaks, quietly, from the inside. A slow split down the grain that nobody sees until the whole thing gives way. His voice, her laughter, his promise. She suspects nothing. She never does. I picked the bowl back up. I walked to the kitchen. I set it down on the counter, covered it neatly with a cloth, and went upstairs to our chambers. I bathed. I braided my hair. I lay in the bed we shared and stared at the ceiling until the candles burned out. I did not cry. Because something shifted in me that night, something cold and precise, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. Draven had spent 4 years building his reign on the foundation of my silence. He had mistaken my stillness for weakness, my obedience for blindness, my patience for defeat. He was wrong, and I had already begun collecting the proof. Chapter 1. I left on a Tuesday, not because Tuesday held any significance, but because Draven held his border patrol briefings on Tuesday mornings, which meant 3 hours. 3 hours where no one would think to look for the Alpha's quiet, obedient wife. No one ever looked for me anyway. I had been planning it for 6 weeks, not in the frantic, desperate way of a woman running, but in the deliberate, unhurried way of a woman deciding. There is a difference. One leaves traces, forgotten items, slammed doors, tear-stained letters. The other leaves nothing but a made bed and a folded note that says only, "Don't look for me." I took 3 things that were mine. My mother's ring, a thin silver band she'd pressed into my palm the morning I was presented to Draven's pack as his chosen mate. She had looked at me then, with eyes that already knew something I didn't. I understood them now, a leather satchel, worn at the strap, deep-pocketed, practical. And the evidence. It had started with a ledger. I found it by accident, or what Draven would have called accident. I had gone into his private study to leave his evening correspondence the way I did every Thursday, neat and unasked for, because that was the shape I had learned to hold. His desk drawer had been left open, just slightly. The kind of careless inch that powerful men allow themselves because they have never once considered that the quiet woman moving through their halls might have eyes. I almost didn't look. I almost tucked the correspondence into its usual place and walked back out and continued being Nyra, the still one, the soft-spoken one, the one the council wives pitied at gatherings with their eyes while their mouths said nothing. But I looked. The ledger was small, bound in dark green, and in Draven's own handwriting, the same hand that had once traced my name into the frost on a window the winter we met, were columns of names, dates, and payments. Pack members, elders, border wolves, all of them compensated for silence on matters that had no business being silent. I didn't take it that night. I memorized the first page. Returned it precisely as I found it, closed the drawer to its original inch, and I came back, week after week, careful and consistent, photographing pages with the small device Elder Maren's daughter had shown me how to use. Elder Maren, who Draven thought was loyal to him, not knowing her daughter had grown up watching her mother's testimony be buried in that same ledger under a payment dated 4 years prior. What I found was not one betrayal. It was an architecture of them. Land seizures disguised as rogue punishment. Wolves banished on fabricated charges so their territory could be absorbed into Draven's expanding borders. A bloodline record, altered, my bloodline record, altered, to obscure that I came from a lineage the pack laws would have made untouchable, unmarriageable to him without my full, informed consent. Consent I had never been given the information to grant. He had not just cheated on me in that study with another woman's laughter. He had built his entire reign on a structure of buried truths, and he had buried me somewhere in the foundation, quiet and load-bearing and never once consulted. I left on a Tuesday with a satchel, a ring, and copies of everything. The originals I had already moved, piece by piece over 6 weeks, each one placed into the keeping of someone Draven had wronged and underestimated, because men like him created an entire network of people with nothing left to lose, and he had never once thought to be afraid of them. I drove 3 hours north, past the pack's boundary markers, past the tree line Draven had once told me marked the edge of the world worth living in. I kept driving. I had a name, a contact passed to me through Elder Maren's daughter, who had passed it through someone else, the way truth moves when it has been made illegal. A wolf outside pack jurisdiction. A record keeper. Someone who knew what to do with documentation when the time was right. The time was not yet right. But I was no longer the woman who waited for permission to decide when. I didn't look back at the gates. I had spent 4 years looking soft in that pack, looking grateful, looking like the gentle, decorative wife of a powerful man, present at every function, silent at every meeting, pouring tea with both hands while they decided the fates of wolves who deserved better. I had been so quiet for so long that I think even I had started to confuse my stillness with helplessness. But stillness is not the same as surrender. It never was. I was simply waiting for the moment when my silence would be worth more broken than kept. That moment was coming, and when I walked back through those gates, and I would walk back, I would not be carrying Stu. Chapter 2. 2 years. That is how long it takes to rebuild a person from the inside out. Not the outside. The outside comes later, almost effortlessly, once the inside is solid enough to hold it. 2 years of small, unglamorous, necessary work. The kind that doesn't look like anything from the outside, but is, in fact, everything. I want to be honest about what those 2 years actually looked like. Because the version in my head, the version I had imagined during the worst nights inside that park, when I was still planning, still waiting, was cleaner than the reality. In my imagination, I left and immediately became someone formidable, certain, striding through neutral territories with purpose and direction, already transformed. Real life doesn't do that. Real life gives you 3 months of just trying to sleep properly first. The first thing I had to unlearn was vigilance, Not the useful kind, the involuntary kind, the kind that had become so embedded in 4 years of managing myself carefully around Draven and his pack that it operated entirely below the level of conscious thought. I would sit down to eat a meal and find myself mentally editing what I was about to say before I'd said anything. To no one. In an empty room. I would walk into a space and automatically note the exits, the power dynamics, who was watching whom, where I should position myself to be least disruptive. It took months before I could sit in a room without doing that. I didn't notice it stopping exactly. I just noticed one morning that I had eaten breakfast without performing it for an invisible audience, and I had to sit with that for a moment. The smallness of it. The enormity of it. Sable was not what I had expected. I had built her up in my mind during the drive north, made her into something almost mythic, the way you do with people you need to be extraordinary. What I found was a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a cluttered desk, and the particular directness of someone who has spent decades dealing with people in difficult situations and has long since stopped having patience for anything that wastes time. She looked at what I brought her without theatrics. She read. She cross-referenced. She went back and read again. Then she said, "You pulled this from inside his study." "Over 6 weeks," I said. She took her glasses off her forehead and put them on properly, and looked at me over the frames for a moment. "How?" she said, not skeptically, genuinely wanting to know the method. So I told her. The Thursday correspondence routine, the drawer left open that inch, the careful photographing, one section at a time, never taking more than was safe to take in a single visit. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Most people," she said, "would have taken the whole thing the first night and run." "That would have given him time to discredit it," I said. "And me." She nodded slowly. "You'll need more. Corroborating testimony. Witnesses. Cross-referenced dates that hold up to a formal tribunal's standards." "I know," I said. "That's a year's work. Maybe 2. "I know." She looked at me for another moment. Then she opened a drawer in her cluttered desk and pulled out a second set of reading glasses. Older, slightly bent at one arm, and set them on the desk between us. "You're going to need these," she said. "The ledger entries are small." That was how it began. The work itself was not dramatic. I want to be clear about that, because I think when people imagine a woman building a case against a corrupt Alpha King, they picture something cinematic. Late nights, tense exchanges, narrow escapes. There were some of those. Mostly there was paperwork. Sable connected me to a network of displaced wolves, those Draven had banished, absorbed, or simply made invisible through the quiet, bureaucratic violence of altered records and unanswered appeals. I traveled to find them, not glamorously. Long drives on empty roads, staying in places that were affordable and unassuming, eating whatever was available, and thinking about the next interview, the next statement, the next name to cross-reference against the ledger. I sat in small homes and cramped apartments, around outdoor fires in territories that had no formal pack structure left because Draven had systematically dismantled it, piece by piece, and called the dismantling something else each time. I listened to people who had not been listened to in years. That part, I won't pretend it was just professional. It wasn't. Some of those conversations stayed with me in a way that the documentation didn't. A family who had lost their land in a border seizure and rebuilt somewhere smaller, and were still, years later, speaking about it in the careful tones of people who hadn't entirely processed that they were allowed to be angry. An older wolf who had been on Draven's council before he asked one question too many and found himself formally charged with something vague and unprovable and quietly removed. They all had the same thing in common. They had been made to feel, over time, that what happened to them was inevitable. That power worked this way, that there was no version of events in which their testimony mattered to anyone with the authority to act on it. I told every single one of them that I was writing it down, that it would be used, that their name, if they consented, would be attached to something that would be read in a formal proceeding by people who had the authority to act on it. Most of them cried, not dramatically, just quietly. The way people cry when something they had stopped hoping for turns out to still be possible. Meanwhile, through Sable's network, I received occasional information about what was happening inside the pack. Draven had told the pack I was on an extended personal retreat, overwhelmed by the demands of pack life, resting somewhere private. The council had accepted this without apparent difficulty, which told me everything I needed to know about how visible I had actually been inside my own marriage. Vesa had become a permanent fixture at his side. There was talk of a formal remating ceremony, a dissolution of our bond on grounds of abandonment, a new beginning for the Alpha King, who had suffered quietly through a difficult marriage and deserved happiness. I read these reports in Sable's office with a cup of tea, going cold at my elbow, and felt less than I expected to, honestly. Not nothing. There was something there, something dull and residual, the emotional equivalent of pressing on an old bruise, but not the devastation I might have anticipated. What I felt mostly was clarity. He was going to gather every elder, every council member, every wolf with the authority to hear what I had built, into one room on one specific day to witness his new beginning. He was going to do my work for me. Sable looked at the completed file on a grey afternoon in the second year. She went through it the way she always did, methodically, glasses on, reading rather than skimming. It took a long time. I drank 2 cups of tea and looked out the window at nothing in particular. Finally, she closed the last folder. "This is enough," she said. "Just that." But from Sable, those 3 words were a standing ovation. I nodded. Finished my tea. "When's the ceremony?" she asked. 6 weeks, I said. She looked at me over her glasses. "Are you ready?" I thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved. "I don't think ready is the right word," I said. "I think I'm done waiting." She almost smiled. Almost. "Same thing," she said. "In my experience." Chapter 3. I arrived the night before. Not to the pack grounds. Not yet. I took a room at a lodge on the edge of the neutral territory, the kind of place that asked no questions and kept no records. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, not doing anything in particular. Just sitting. Just being in the same air as the place I had left 2 years ago. It felt strange, not frightening. Just strange. The way returning to a childhood home feels strange, smaller than you remembered, less powerful over you than it once was. I ordered food I barely tasted. I slept better than I expected to. In the morning, I got dressed. I want to be honest about something. I had imagined this moment many times over the past 2 years. In some versions, I was cold and flawless, a woman carved from something unbreakable, walking in slow motion through parting crowds while dramatic music played somewhere in the background of my own fantasy. Real life is less cinematic. My hands were slightly damp when I pulled on my coat. I checked my reflection in the lodge mirror and noticed a small thread loose at my collar and spent a full minute deciding whether to find scissors or leave it. I left it. I picked up the satchel. I stood at the door for a moment longer than I intended. Then I walked out. The pack meeting was scheduled for midday. It was a formal gathering, the kind Draven held in the Great Hall whenever something significant was being announced to the full pack. Sable's contact on the inside had confirmed what I already suspected. Today was the day. The formal dissolution of our bond. The announcement of Vesa. The beginning of whatever Draven had decided came next. He had sent no word to me. No formal notice. No messenger. Of course he hadn't. He believed I had already left in defeat. That I was somewhere far away, diminished and done. The quiet wife who had finally, quietly, disappeared. I walked through the pack gates at 11:47. The first person to see me was a young wolf named Petra, one of the kitchen staff, someone I had exchanged small kindnesses with over the years. She was crossing the courtyard with a stack of folded linens, and she stopped so abruptly that the top two slipped, and she caught them by instinct, staring at me with her mouth slightly open. "Luna Nyra," she said. The old title. She used it without thinking. "Petra," I said. "Good morning." I kept walking. I heard the linens hit the ground behind me anyway. By the time I reached the entrance to the Great Hall, word had moved ahead of me, the way it always does in small, tightly woven communities, fast and slightly distorted, and arriving just before you do. I could feel it in the shift of the air, the way conversations near the doorway dropped half a register, the way people turned. I didn't rush. I had spent 4 years learning to move through rooms at whatever pace made other people comfortable. I was done with that particular skill. I walked at my own pace, which was unhurried, and I was aware of every eye tracking me, and I let them look. I had dressed carefully. Not dramatically. I hadn't arrived in some sweeping statement of a gown, which is what I think people expect when they imagine a woman returning to reclaim something. I wore dark trousers, a fitted jacket the color of deep charcoal, and my mother's ring. My hair was down. I looked, I think, exactly like myself, but a version of myself that had been left alone long enough to actually finish forming. That, it turned out, was statement enough. Draven was standing at the front of the hall with Elder Cassian at his right and Vesa at his left when I walked in. I will give him this. He recovered quickly. A lesser man might have stumbled visibly. Draven simply went very still, the kind of stillness that, in another context, might have looked like composure, but which I recognized, after 4 years of studying him, as the stillness of a man whose mind is moving very fast behind a face that has been trained not to show it. Vesa was less practiced. Her expression moved through 3 things in about 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, and then something that settled into a careful blankness that told me she was smarter than I had given her credit for. Elder Cassian looked at me the way men who have done wrong look at inconvenient truths, briefly, and then away. I found a place to stand near the center of the room. Not at the back, where I might be managed or dismissed. Not at the front, where I might appear aggressive before I had said a word. The center, where I could be seen clearly, and where I had a clean sightline to the council seats arranged along the far wall. I set my satchel down at my feet, and I waited. Draven recovered his voice before I expected him to. Nyra. He said my name the way he always had in formal settings, measured, controlled, with the particular neutrality of a man performing normalcy. This is a closed pack gathering. I know, I said. I'm pack. A murmur moved through the room, quiet but present. You left, he said. I did, I agreed. There was a pause. He was recalibrating. I could see it. He had prepared for today's meeting with me as a variable that no longer existed, and now I was standing in the middle of his hall, composed and unhurried, with a satchel at my feet, and he did not know what was in it. That uncertainty, watching it move behind his eyes while his face held its careful stillness, was the first moment I felt something close to satisfaction. Not cruelty, not triumph. Just the clean, quiet feeling of a thing landing exactly where you placed it. "You dissolved nothing," I said, before he could redirect the room. No formal notice was sent to me. No witness signature. No tribunal was convened. I looked briefly at the council seats. Under pack law, an alpha cannot dissolve a mate bond unilaterally without a formal proceeding. Which means this meeting, as it was intended to run today, I picked up the satchel, needs to be restructured. The hall was very quiet now. Not the polite quiet of a crowd being patient, the held breath quiet of a room that understands something is happening and does not yet know what. Elder Cassian found his voice. "On what grounds?" he said carefully. "Would you restructure a pack meeting, Luna?" I looked at him. He was one of the names in the ledger. He knew that I knew the moment our eyes met. "On the grounds," I said, "that I have evidence of crimes committed against this pack by its alpha." I set the satchel on the table at the center of the room, and I'd like to present it now. Chapter 4. Nobody moved for a moment. That kind of silence has a texture to it. I noticed that. It is not empty. It is full of people deciding things. Deciding whether to speak, whether to look at the person next to them, whether to pretend they haven't understood what was just said. The great hall had perhaps 80 wolves in it, and for about 4 seconds, all 80 of them were doing that quiet, private calculation simultaneously. Then everybody started talking at once. Draven's voice cut through it. Enough. One word. The alpha command behind it. That particular frequency that vibrates in the chest rather than the ears. The room settled. Old instinct. 80 wolves responding to a voice that had been their authority for years. But I noticed something. It settled them. It did not silence them completely. 2 years ago, that same voice in that same room would have produced immediate, total quiet. What I heard now was compliance with an undercurrent, a restlessness that the command could dampen but not fully extinguish. He had been losing them slowly. He just didn't know how slowly until this moment. Draven stepped forward from the front of the hall. He moved with the particular deliberateness of a man who understands that how he crosses a room right now matters as much as anything he says when he gets to the other end of it. He stopped a few feet from the table where I had placed the satchel. "Whatever you think you have," he said, quietly enough that it was almost private, almost just the two of us. "This is not the way." "You didn't give me away," I said. Same volume. "You gave me a performance to participate in and called it a marriage." Something moved across his face, quick, gone before anyone else would have caught it. But I knew his face the way you know a place you've lived in for years. Every corner, every draft, every spot where the light falls strangely. It was not anger. It was the specific expression of a person hearing a true thing they have been successfully not hearing for a very long time. I opened the satchel. I didn't make theater of it. I didn't hold documents aloft or narrate what I was placing on the table. I simply laid things out in the order Sable and I had agreed on. The order that told the story most cleanly, that required the least explanation because the documents explained themselves. The ledger copies first, Then the corroborating testimony. 12 written statements, each one signed and witnessed by a neutral third party, each one traceable to a specific entry in the ledger. Then the lineage records. Mine, original, and the altered version, filed under Draven's administration, side by side. I looked up at the council seats when I placed the lineage records down. Elder Cassian had gone the color of old ash. One of the other elders, Elder Rowan, older than Cassian, someone I had always found quietly decent in the way that some people inside corrupt systems manage to remain quietly decent, leaned forward in his seat. "May I?" he said. Not a command. A request. "Please," I said. He came down from the council seats and stood at the table and looked at what I had laid out. He picked up the first testimony, read it with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who understands that speed here would be a disrespect to what they are holding. He set it down, picked up the ledger copy. His eyes moved to the entry I had marked, then he looked at Draven. I had known Elder Rowan for 4 years. I had poured his tea at formal gatherings and listened to him argue, mildly but persistently, for fairness in border disputes that Draven consistently overruled. I had never seen him look at Draven the way he looked at him in that moment. "These are your accounts," Elder Rowan said. Flat. Certain. Not a question. Draven said nothing. "Kale's banishment," Rowan continued, still looking at him. "The Mirren family land seizure. The Tauran bloodline record." He paused. "Nyra's bloodline record." Still nothing. Draven. And now the title was gone from it. Just his name. "These are your accounts." The room had gone very quiet again, different from before. Before it was the quiet of shock. This was the quiet of a verdict being reached, not by any formal process, not yet, but in the way that 80 people in a room absorb something true and feel it settle into certainty. Vesa had not moved from the front of the hall. I had not looked at her directly since I had entered, not out of avoidance, but because she was not the source of anything. She was a detail. What was happening here was larger than her, and I thought perhaps she understood that, because she was very still, and her expression had moved past the careful blankness I had noted earlier into something that looked, honestly, like a woman quietly reconsidering many things. Draven looked at me, really looked at me. Not the managed look he had given me when I walked in, the one that was performing normalcy while his mind calculated. This was different. This was the look of a man who has run out of calculations. "You planned this," he said. "For 2 years," I said. "You had 4. A breath went through the room at that. Barely audible. "I looked for you," he said. And I heard something in it that I had not expected and was not entirely prepared for. Not love. I don't think it was love, but something adjacent to it. Regret, maybe. Or the ghost of regret. The feeling of a person who has understood something too late and knows with total clarity that the lateness is entirely their own doing. I had prepared for his anger, his denial, his attempt to manage the room and reframe the narrative, which he was skilled at. I was not perfectly prepared for this. I let myself feel it for a moment, the sadness of it, because it was sad. 4 years. A person I had believed in. A life I had genuinely wanted, that deserved to be felt, at least briefly. Then I let it go. "I know," I said. "That was your choice." He had no answer for that. Elder Rowan straightened up from the table. "Under pack law," he said, to the room rather than to any individual, "the evidence presented here constitutes sufficient grounds for a formal tribunal." He looked at the other council members. This meeting cannot proceed as intended." He looked at Draven. "And the Alpha's authority is suspended, pending a full tribunal proceeding." Draven stood very still. Not the stillness of composure this time. The stillness of a man watching something he built for years, with considerable ruthlessness and considerable intelligence, come apart. Not violently, not dramatically, but methodically. Document by document. Truth by truth. The way I had always done things. Quietly. Thoroughly. Without leaving anything out. I picked up my satchel. It was lighter now. Chapter 5. The tribunal took 3 weeks. I want to be clear about something. It was not 3 weeks of dramatic confrontations and sweeping speeches. Mostly it was paperwork, testimony sessions that ran long and then longer, elders asking the same questions in slightly different configurations to make sure the answers held. Wolves I had never met, traveling from distant territories to give statements they had been waiting years to give to someone who was actually writing them down. It was slow and procedural and unglamorous. It was exactly what justice looks like when it is real. I stayed in the pack during the tribunal. That surprised people. I think they expected me to retreat back to neutral territory, to remain at a safe distance and send Sable as my representative. But I had not spent 2 years building this to watch it from somewhere else. I took a room in the eastern wing, the guest quarters, not the Alpha's chambers, which Draven had vacated pending the proceedings. And I woke up every morning and I showed up. I ate in the communal hall. Quietly at first, with the particular self-consciousness of someone uncertain of their reception. But the thing about showing up consistently is that it gradually stops being remarkable. By the 2nd week, Petra had started saving me a seat near the window without being asked. By the 3rd week, 2 of the wolves whose testimony I had collected were sitting with me at meals, talking about ordinary things. The weather, the state of the northern borders, a new litter of pups born to one of the pack families. Life, continuing, as it does. Draven and I spoke once during the tribunal, not in a formal session. It was early morning, the kind of hour that belongs to nobody in particular, and I was in the small courtyard off the eastern wing because I couldn't sleep, and the air outside was sharp and useful. He was there when I came out. I don't know if it was deliberate or coincidence, and I decided it didn't matter. We stood for a moment without speaking. He looked tired, not the performed weariness of a busy, important man. Genuinely tired, the kind that comes from the inside. I told myself, he said eventually, that everything I did was for the pack. I know, I said. I believed it. For a long time, I actually believed it. I looked at him. I know that too. He was quiet. Then, was there ever a version of this where it didn't end here? I thought about it honestly, because he deserved an honest answer, and because I was done managing what I said to him. Yes, I said, early on. If you had been different, early on. He nodded slowly, like someone receiving a diagnosis they had already suspected. I'm sorry, Nyra. 2 years ago, those words would have meant everything, would have rearranged me completely. I had replayed imaginary versions of them in my head more times than I could count in the early months. Him saying them, me forgiving him, some other version of our life resuming. Now they were just words, true ones, I thought. But words arriving after the thing they were meant to address had already been fully dealt with by other means. I know, I said, for the 3rd time, and then, because there was nothing else to honestly say, I went back inside. The tribunal concluded on a grey Thursday morning. Draven was found in violation of pack law on 7 counts. Land seizure under false pretenses, falsification of bloodline records, misuse of Alpha authority in 5 separate banishment proceedings. Elder Cassian was removed from the council. 2 other officials resigned before their cases reached formal proceedings, which the tribunal noted without particular comment. The mate bond dissolution was granted. Formally this time, with the correct witnesses and the correct documentation, and my full, informed consent, the consent that had never been properly sought to begin with. I signed my name and felt almost nothing. Which sounds sad, but wasn't quite. It was more like finishing a very long book. The signing was just the last page. The story had ended some time before. Elder Rowan found me afterward in the courtyard. He was carrying 2 cups of something hot, and he offered me one without preamble, which I appreciated. "The council would like to discuss interim leadership," he said. "There are several candidates under consideration. We would also like your input, if you're willing." I looked at him. "My input." "Your input," he said. Straightforward. "You know this pack. You've known it for 4 years, and you've spent 2 more years talking to every wolf it failed. That knowledge is relevant." I wrapped both hands around the cup. This was the moment I realized that the story could have been tidy and triumphant. Nyra assumes the throne. Crowd cheers, fade to gold light and orchestral swells. I had seen enough of that kind of story to recognize the shape of it, but I was tired of performing shapes. "I'll give my input," I said. "I'm not interested in leading the pack, but I'm interested in what happens to it." Rowan nodded, unsurprised. "That's enough." I left again 3 weeks after the tribunal. Different from the first time. The first time I left as an escape. This time I left as a choice, which sounds like a small distinction, but is, in practice, an enormous one. Everything about leaving felt different. I packed more slowly. I said goodbye to people. Petra hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. I drove north again, toward Sable's territory. I had work to do. There were other packs, other systems, other ledgers in other drawers that powerful men had left open an inch because they had never once considered that the quiet woman in the room might have eyes. Sable had contacts. I had skills I had not fully known I possessed until I was forced to use them. It turned out that years of being underestimated in important rooms was, professionally speaking, an extraordinary asset. I thought about Draven sometimes, not with anger anymore, and not with longing. More like the way you think about weather from a previous season, acknowledging it happened, noting how it shaped things, not wishing it back. He was still in there somewhere, I knew. Not as Alpha. He had accepted a quiet role in the pack's outer territories, which surprised people who had known him as someone who required authority, the way some people require air. Maybe the tribunal had changed something in him. Maybe it hadn't. I wasn't the right person to know. I had spent enough of myself trying to know Draven. My mother's ring caught the light on the drive north. I had been wearing it on my right hand since I filed the final paperwork, moved it across deliberately, a small private ceremony that nobody witnessed and nobody needed to. The road ahead was long and empty, and entirely mine to drive at whatever speed I chose. I turned the music up. I kept going. "Thanks for watching," Draven called her obedient. He forgot that the most quiet people in the room are usually the ones paying the most attention. Drop your thoughts in the comments if Nyra deserved better from the start. Please hit the like button if you like this story, and subscribe to Amy's Story for more.